Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Fabio. And today we're going to have a presentation of two design leaders. I mean, the head of design of Nissan in Japan, Giovanni, and Fabio, that he has been working more than 30 years in the automotive industry. And the idea is that each of them, they're going to give you the vision about design and design in Japan and why Japan is different. No? So maybe I would like to give to you, Fabio, first the introduction. No?
Okay, thank you. Maybe so the first thing is about understanding why I'm here talking about Japan, because I'm Italian, but I live in Tokyo. And in fact, in my 30 years of car design career, I've been starting in 1989 by working in Japan. So I worked 4 years in Japan in 1989. And then well, this is my quick resume of my path. So after being in Japan, I've been in France, I've been in Spain also, working for Volkswagen Group, and then again in France, in Italy. And when I arrived almost 25 years after my first time to be in Japan, okay, I decided to move back to Japan once again. So in 2018, I have opened a design consultancy company in Tokyo. And since then, with my wife Kayoko, I'm living there and working from there. So my relation with Japan has been in two separate periods, but during all of this year, my relation with Japan has been quite involving and recurrent. So I have, I'd say I have a good experience about Japan, even though it's always difficult to explain this type of experiences. So I'll try to do it in some way. When we start to talk about Japan and Japanese design and Japanese culture, most of the people expect this, expect Zen. They imagine the Zen garden like the Ryoanji temple in Kyoto, which is a stone garden, very pure, very minimalist. And that is the spiritual part of Japan, of Japanese culture. But then you have also this. You have also this, which is probably the totally opposite, is the popular culture, is the culture of traditional theater like No or Kabuki. So you can see that these two parts are exactly contrasting each other, and they are coexisting. And they were coexisting already at the time in the traditional culture, but somehow they're still coexisting today, because if you look at architecture, like the White Temple of Takashi Yamaguchi or the Church of Light of Tadao Ando, but also like the project you have seen here in the exhibition, you can see that there is this very spiritual part of it, which goes to the synthesis, to the minimalism, to a sort of very essential way of interpreting space, material, and light. So this very spiritual and minimalist part is still existing today. And in the same way, the popular side, the pop culture, is having also the much more wild and loud and colorful part of the culture. So with the manga, with the Gundam, with anime, if you go to have a little trip, a little stroll in Akihabara, you are just completely overwhelmed by sound, noise, lights. So it's exactly the opposite of what we have seen before, this minimalist spirituality. So I'm trying maybe, because it's difficult to explain about Japan in such a short time, and probably I wouldn't even be able to do it with much more time. So I just try to concentrate on this aspect, the aspect of contrast. Because Japan is a culture of contrast, and these contrasts coexist. So for example, if we look at fashion design, also, again, you have it here in the exhibition. Look at this case. We have the three most important Japanese fashion designer who revolutioned the fashion in the late 70s, early 80s. And Yohji Yamamoto, Issei Miyake, Rei Kawakubo. And you can see that the broadband of their, the bandwidth of their expression goes from very simple and extreme essential minimalism to very loud and colorful expression, like the one of Rei Kawakubo there, or maybe the same Issei Miyake goes from very simple graphic design to a sort of explosion of shape and a sort of iconic use of images and color. So again, even in the fashion, this two-side, contrasting side, minimalism, spiritual side, minimalistic and popular side, more visible, more extreme, they coexist. I would say it could be also a little bit the same in car design, but car design, maybe Giovanni later will explain something better than this, but car design is also now influenced by, I would say, global trends. So it's much more difficult to say, to position really clearly Japanese attitude, even in the Japanese brand. But for example, you can see that some of the cars from Nissan, mostly on the late 80s, early 90s, like those concept cars you have seen here, or some of the products that they made, were also imprinted by this very essential minimalist and functional spirit. While, for example, lately, you see much more vehicles which are the same expression of the Gundam we have seen before, or maybe of a kabuki mask. Okay, so again, this extreme coexist. If we talk about product design instead, it's much more linear. I think product design in Japan is much more oriented towards essentiality, minimalism, transparency. So you can see, for example, starting from classic like the Ikari by Hisamu Noguchi, or the stool butterfly, and Shiro Kuramata stool, chair, they were always imprinted in this very pure, essential shapes, also back to the functionality or even expressing pure poetry. And this type of things, you can still feel it in the products of today. So product design is much more trying to take inspiration from this essential or minimalist expression. And that is the same expression you had in the traditional objects of Japan, which are beautiful on their own. Those objects can go back to a few centuries ago, some of them, but they are still so modern and out of time. For example, those sandals are just perfect. They are symmetrical. So you have one single shape and you use it for both foods. Or like the scissors are really simply done with one single piece of metal being forged and transformed into a blade, then folded to make the loop, and then you double it, you have two of them, and you make a scissor which is just beautiful. It's just a perfect and beautiful object. Also, is an object that adapts to every hand. While, for example, Western scissors are made on purpose for some hands. For example, if you are left hand, they don't work. Or if you have small hands or bigger hands. This one adapts to everything. And that's the same for the saw you see there, this hand saw. Is the difference between a Japanese saw and a Western one. A Western one cuts when you push it. You have a handle that is ergonomic, but you can handle it only in one single way. While the Japanese one have two types of saw, so you can use it by doing large cut or thinner cuts, is also much more, it cuts when you pull and not when you push, and is much more flexible because the handle being so simple, you can use it with one hand, you can use it with two hands, you can hold it and use it like that in difficult situations. So somehow there is something in Japanese design and maybe that is the point I would like just to end. There is something on Japanese design, it's a type of perfection that makes the object maybe 90% perfect, and the rest of the 10% is the user who put it. So this flexibility, to have something that is perfect for many people is the minimum as possible form or shape for the functionality, but you need also to have a certain interaction with the tool, and then it becomes perfect. And this is the last example to show exactly that idea and why Japanese design is different. This was a project from Shigeru Ban. Shigeru Ban is a Pritzker Prize architect, very, very famous. And he was asked to do, together with other designer and architect, they were asked to do a proposal on very basic and simple object of everyday life. And so Shigeru Ban decided to do something on the toilet paper. I mean, what can you do with a toilet paper? And so he did something that seems exactly the opposite of what most of the people would think. He made the pipe inside a square, which is, it looks like a nonsense. But by making the pipe inside square, by compressing also the rolls, they were rolled and then they were compressed to become square. First, he reduced the space of the pack of the rolls. So reducing the space, reducing the cost of transportation, reducing the consumption, reducing the CO2 and all of those things. And at the same time, the fact that the piping is square, it doesn't roll easily. So you don't waste paper. You pull it and you have clack, 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 and you feel how much you have to use it. And you do 1, 2, 3, and then you stop. Well, maybe with a normal roll, you can just go like that. So for me, this is such a simple thing, but only a Japanese could have been thinking in that way, because it's taking the essence of something, of an object, and then being able to see it from a different side and transform it in something even more interesting, even more intelligent, with the minimum of effort. So I think that is what I feel is probably the real spirit of Japanese design. Domo arigato gozaimashita.
Thank you very much, Fabio. I think we have seen today from one side an overview, basically, of Japanese design, culture, and what makes Japan special. And now we're going to see from Giovanni how this is applied into the design, like a company like Nissan, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, yeah, the other way around. Tienes que cambiar el power.
Electrification, passenger cars, crossovers, SUVs. Okay. Like this? Okay. I've been with Nissan 22 years. I graduated Art Center in 2000, and I made the good choice to go to Nissan because at the time, it was just when this Renault-Nissan alliance took place. And actually, as a designer, it was a very exciting place to go because they were reinventing the brand and starting a next chapter. And as a designer, it was a chance to be able to shape that journey moving forward. So 22 years ago, I was lucky, maybe 2 months after I hired, Nissan brought me to Japan, and the first time to ever go to Japan, and it was a very eye-opening, experience. It was very shocking and vibrant to arrive in Tokyo. It was another world. It's another planet. You know, me coming from Southern California, grown up there all my life. And to be honest, I didn't travel much as a kid, so I was very looking forward to explore the world. So arriving in Tokyo, you know, just this metropolis of technology and vibrance and energy was very overwhelming. And then at the same time, I got to go on a Shinkansen trip down to Kyoto and to experience the art and culture and beauty and tradition in the city of Kyoto, where it's, you know, you can see everything there, like the Ryoji Garden and all these things. And I got to stay in a traditional ryokan, which is an amazing experience. You know, there's tradition and ceremony there that is still imprinted into me from that time. So, 20 years later, I'm still at Nissan, but we're at a new crossroads, a new chapter of the brand as we fully dive into the electrified, you know, paradigm shift the automotive industry is into. And as Nissan, there we go. You know, we were doing a bit of soul searching as a brand and as a company to understand the spirit, who we really are. And of course, we're a Japanese company. And as Nissan Design, we thought, you know, really now is the time to celebrate that. Now is the time to really, the world is hungry, the appetite is ready for a Japanese design that is unashamedly being Japanese. So we cultivated what we call timeless Japanese futurism. Obviously, timeless and futurism are very contradicting words. Something that is timeless, but then also pushing the boundaries of what the future is. And at the center, really, the core is the Japanese spirit as a Japanese company. But you know, I think some of that there lies within the crossroads of the theme of this whole show, which is the tradition and modernity. And so here's an image of what we, I think, accomplished in our timeless Japanese futurism is combining that sense of Japanese spirit and some sense of futurism. So in design, we worked hard to cultivate some DNA keywords that we felt we could use for the brand in the next chapter, like Ma, which is the mastery of empty space by respecting the construction. To me, this is really cool. It's like, it's the force, it's the energy in between the objects. And then Sei, that supports Ma by cleverly treated structures and detail. And then Kabuku, which is daring with audacity and diversity. So this word is interesting. My boss is the one who identified this word, Tai Satoru. It's not kabuki, but kabuku. But it's that sense of being provocative and daring. And as a company, we want to be daring and provoking. So, and utsuroi, fluidity and asymmetry created by nature. So once we define these key DNAs, we set off in the design of, let's say, Aria, and you'll see the next generation of products having this, you know, JDNA woven into the designs. So we, you know, minimalism. When we started designing these cars, we were working on thinking of the sense of minimalism, and minimalism is sometimes can be misconstrued as something just very simple, without any emotion. But you know, I think in the way, let's say, that rock garden in Kyoto, there's a sense of minimalism there, but underlying there is a lot of power and a lot of energy. And, how do we capture that? How do we capture that cleanliness and pureness, but imbue it with a spirit and power and energy? And in our case of Aria was, that electrified energy underneath. So, even these cars, it's just a simple line, but in between that simple line, there's actually a lot of energy. There's a lot of motion and tension and movement, which, we can still call this minimalism, but there's a lot of power within. And I think for me, that was taking a lot from the inspiration of the Japanese art and design sensibility. And then there's the other side, obviously, the celebration of the seasons. By the way, this is a little K-car EV. In Japan, they have a segment called K, which was originally defined by the cc of the motor, the width and the length, and you get some tax break because of that. And so it's very defined, the parameters you have to work with. But in Japan, space is limited in the cities and also on the streets. And in the case of this one, defined by this legal platform, right? But as we set to redefine what it meant to be a K-car when we went electrified, we stretched the boundaries because it was just a small EV. But in the case of this car, we thought on the other end of the spectrum from Aria, why can't a small EV still have the sense of the sensibilities and premiumness and beauty? So. And I also wanted to show this slide just because in Japan, I think the celebration of the seasons is such a powerful thing. So even in the communication of this car, we have the spring, the summer, the winter, and the autumn. And again, this is an inspiration that the design team took from, this Japanese sensibility. And then architecture. The reality is before I became a car designer, I wanted to be an architect, but I was never very good at math. But actually, I grew up very close to Art Center College of Design, which is a big car design school. So as soon as I knew about that was the direction I was going in. But I'm a big fan of architecture, and I'm a big fan of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I think Frank Lloyd Wright was inspired a lot by Japan. As you know, he loved Japanese art. And the minimalism and the purity of Japanese, even architecture. This is this could be a 800-year-old, house in Kyoto, actually. Actually, it is in Kyoto. I've been there. But it's so modern in its sense, in its concept. The open space, the soji screen, glass, almost screens that open up to the outside. This is modernism. This influenced modern architecture, I think, in Europe and the United States, and it obviously influenced Frank Lloyd Wright. And he brought this concept to the US and, reinterpreted it a new way. And in the same way, he went to Japan and built the Imperial Palace and actually various architecture in Japan, which in turn influenced Japanese design and architecture. So I find that quite fascinating, especially being a foreigner, reinterpreting what inspires me from Japan and then creating, designs from that. So, but there's a purity and minimalism to this that resonated, and also, that wooden deck that you see on the house. That is the space that is called engawa, between the inside and the outside. Which is the space in between the inside and the out. And we thought this was a very interesting concept that was inspiring for us when we were designing the interiors of the car, in the sense. And also even this, I know this is not engawa, but in Japan, when you have this very intimate sushi experience with the chef right in front of you, first of all, this bar is beautiful. It's super minimal. And then, you know, you have the sushi chef behind preparing for you. And they have this thing called omakase, where you do not order, you know, basically the chef prepares for you. And he's gauging your reaction and your tastes and preparing the meal based on this. And I was inspired by that. I find that quite inspiring because it's a tailored experience. It's an experience. And, you know, when we're working on cars and you're tailoring that experience of the driver and the HMI, GUI, and the outside world is how we can have that sense, you know, that sense of Engawa between the interior space and not only the outside, but, you know, the digital space that's behind those screens. I do think that in the future, more and more, these screens are going to be a window into a next frontier for design. Just the same way these are a window into so many other different things. These are a platform. I believe the interior of the cars will be the same as we move into autonomy and the technology and the revolution of software versus hardware. So how do we tailor that, and how do we make that into an experience that is uniquely our own, and our own, I mean Nissan's case, and give it a sense of Japaneseness, and then in turn make it Nissan-ness. So that influenced a lot, I think, the interior of this car, that sense of minimalism, you know, the elimination of the inessential. You know, all of the buttons and switches have been just melted into the wood finisher. So it's organized in a very seamless horizontal landscape manner. Again, you know, these are the concepts that we felt some influence from Japanese tradition. Speaking of architecture, again, I mean, you know, this is the Okura Hotel. And I love this building because it's really a Japanese mid-century design. But when it was done with obviously a Japanese aesthetic, a Japanese taste. And I find this to be, you know, when we were crafting the word timeless Japanese futurism, to me, this room is that. To me, this room is timeless Japanese futurism. So I wanted to share that because I find it quite beautiful. It's a very modern room, but then in the detail and in the graphic, you know, you can sense the tradition, and you can sense it the way it's been refocused with modern technology. You know, these are just my pictures, by the way. These are just my pictures. This is in Kobe. This is a Frank Lloyd Wright design house up on the hill in Kobe. I forgot the name of the house, but it's I just fell in love with the graphic and the design aesthetic, which is this combination to me of traditional Japanese beauty reinterpreted in a modern fashion. And I think it's a video. The play of the light, I just find quite beautiful. Again, this is a motif that's actually at the Okura Hotel. This is a Kumiko pattern type of a motif. You know, this was influential in the interior details of the aria and also the front grille. You know, this graphic is a kind of a symbolic abstraction of nature, and I find it extremely beautiful and compelling graphic. And, you know, we captured that into the interior details of the speaker grille, in the lower level lighting of the car, which we call andon lighting. I don't have a picture of an andon light, but an andon light is similar to this globe. Light that is low on the ground, and it's usually covered in this kind of a Kumiko pattern. And this is something that we wanted to add to that crossroads of tradition and modernism. Again, another image from that house in Kobe. The asymmetry and graphic beauty was just, It was just beautiful. This, to me, comes into here and gets soaked in, and later on, gets digested out in the designs we work on. But again, another graphic. It almost looks like a tech chip, but a very beautiful graphic. And you can see here, this is the interior of an IMS, what we call the IMS show car. We built in 2019. We were bringing in some of these inspiration and into the inside of the car. So this structure is what's holding the upper IP of the interior. And obviously the air vents come through. But, bringing in a little bit, it might be a little bit literal, but, we find adding these touches, it's clearly still futuristic, but it plays an abstracted homage, I think, to the Japanese sensibility. This is the exterior of the car, and you can see the graphic behind it is it's just for the background, but that is the structure that you see on the interior. So this contrasts the very pure, minimalistic expanse of shape, complemented by intricate beauty, intricate detail and beauty. Here's just another image of the rear. I think I'm almost to the end of the presentation. This complements, I think, what I was talking about earlier about the open plan space. I mean, the interior of this, I feel, is so modern. This open space in blending all the rooms together, this was a concept, that comes, I think, from Japanese architecture. But you can see more and more in modern homes, the opening of each room. The boundaries are separated, and I feel this is a very modern take of something that's actually very traditionally Japanese. Again, like this image, I feel it holds tradition, but clearly it's floating and it has a sense of taking the tradition and bringing it towards the future. Oh, it was a rainy day. Another image to me that captures the crossroads of Japanese tradition and the future. I mean, obviously this is a very futuristic, to me, room, the Aman Hotel in Tokyo, but taking it to a different proportion and making it very vertical. But again, this was very inspirational in some of the designs we're working on. And then just a little bit of a glimpse of a future car we're making for Europe, focused for Europe. But actually, Fabio, you had some images of some Pike cars earlier. And to me, that Japanese history is something that we're trying to build on. And this kind of playful aesthetic. Japan has the very serious, minimal Zen Buddhism, but then there's also this very vibrant and the manga, the playfulness, the pop, and the approachability. And I think that's also part of things we want to bring into the automotive scene as far as for Nissan brand. So a little glimpse of what's to come in the future. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Fabio. I mean, I think to wrap up, basically one of the things that both presentations show, no? That Japan is a country of contrast. I mean, on one hand, you see a lot of expression in certain categories like fashion or manga, and on the other hand, in architecture or in some designs that they look very simple, but they are not simple. I mean, there's a lot of thoroughness, how they have been designed, and there's always a purpose. I mean, like functionality is key, and I think you would not find in Japan a product that is not, it doesn't have the right use, or ergonomic speaking is not correct. They're looking for perfection in that sense, no? But then there's a touch of when you get into certain categories, and today you can see it in this exhibition. I mean, you see the architecture that very minimalism, they're looking for patterns. There's always a pattern behind, sometimes there are patterns that you think that was very simple, but it looks very well proportioned, and it's because they look for the right pattern. And then on top of that, you see fashion, which is super expressive, and probably shows a way that Japanese people want to express themselves. And I fully agree with you. No, I went to Japan the first time in 2003. It was in fact because of Nissan, and I got in love with Tokyo. No, I mean Tokyo is a city that during the day has an image, and when the sunset comes down, it's a completely different city. No? And with a lot of expression, a lot of things going on. So I would like to ask you a first question in the sense that you have been living in Japan more than 20 years. You went to Japan, you came back, you're married with a Japanese woman. As a designer in those 20 years, how much you think living in Japan has affected you when you want to project a new car or a new interior?
Actually, I haven't lived in Japan 20 years. Sorry, I should clarify. I've been working for Nissan 22 years, but in 2007 and 8 and 9, I did go to Japan for a 2-year assignment. Came back to the US. Actually, that 2 years was a great first experience living and working there. Come back to the US. And then 2014, I've come to NDE in London, so I was working at the NDE studio in London for 4 years. And it was a great experience. Worked on the development of the new Juke and the Qashqai that's out now, and we also started the development of Aria in London before moving to Japan for the last 5 years to work to develop further this new form language and this in Japan. So.
And Fabio, you?
Yeah. In fact, I have to say that the first experience I had being in Japan, the first 4 years I spent there, it was for me a sort of training, almost unconscious training. And I realized that after I came back to Europe. Because, for example, I came back from Japan in '93, I went to Paris, and in '94, '95, I worked in a project at Renault for an interior of a concept car, the Renault Initial Paris, which was supposed to express a vision of French luxury. And in fact, as much as I look at that project, I think it's very Japanese, because it was a project done with very light wooden surfaces, very simple, very pure. The instruments of the instrument panel were not visible. So when you enter into the car, it was all covered. There were no buttons, nothing. And then as soon as you plug the key in, there was a sort of panel opening and the lights opening up behind. And I think that also was a sort of way to go through different experiences that was coming maybe from those impression I had from Japan. But the most important thing, Giovanni said in one of the references that Nissan have about, he was speaking about Ma, the first one, so the essence and the mastery of the emptiness, of the empty space. And in fact, one of the things I used to say, and I used to do during all my career of design, when I was designing interior for cars, I was not designing the volumes, I was designing the space in between. So I was quite surprising at that time, it was quite surprising at that time for my colleague, because I was trying mostly to design the empty space rather than the volume on it. And this brought me to have probably a different attitude towards interior, design interior, especially on those years in the 90s, that was quite innovative. And actually, I see that it still goes today in many of the car are presented, either production car or concept car. So this way of really taking everything to the simplicity, to the pure simplicity, and letting the space. And I think it's even more important maybe for the vehicle to come, because will be vehicle maybe driverless, and in that case you don't have even the need anymore to touch, to have the control. So you will just have to enjoy and being easy to adapt and to use the space. And then there is another aspect probably that I can say I realized, is that when in 2011 I went to work at Pininfarina because I took the responsibility, the design, I was design director of Pininfarina for 6 years. And so Pininfarina, many people, I don't know if you know, but is the most, I would say, the most prestigious car design house. It has more than 90 years of existence, has been designing for 60 years cars like Ferrari, and is a symbol of Italian design. But in fact, Pininfarina probably is the Italian design who has as a value, probably the value that are the closest to the Japanese value we have been discussing, because Pininfarina is all about purity, is about elegance, is about timeless, and is about innovation. And so I took the responsibility of that company, even without having worked ever for them before, but I was perfectly fitting because, not because of my Italianness, but probably because of my Japanness. And finally, the product were really Italian still. But I think Japan teach me a lot about this, about essentiality, purity, different layers. You are talking about, it's never, it's simple, but it's never simplistic. There are different layer of perception. There are texture, overlapping of texture. There is light and shadow, and there is the space in between the light and shadow. So it's this sort of refinement and complexity that is probably the deepest spirit of Japanese design.
Yeah.
Craftsmanship as well, no?
Craftsmanship as well, exactly.
I think it's quite amazing that the quality of craftsmanship in some finishing. No?
Yeah, but there is a different way of craftsmanship. It comes from the quality and the skill of the master, because normally to be a craftsman in every type of discipline in Japan, even in sushi, you need to spend many years before being able to be considered a proper master. And there is also in Japan this attitude from masters that when they learn and they are perfectly controlling the craftsmanship, they always let something happen. And so the craftsmanship, it goes not to have everything under control and doing exactly everything perfectly, but even to have the control of accidents, of things that you don't imagine that they would happen, because Japanese always let this space in between. I have been showing before an image of a pot, of a cup, of a bisenyaki, which is a traditional ceramic from before the Edo period. I guess it was during the Edo period, very specialized for the tea ceremony. And the beauty of those objects is very pure because they are timeless. They are very raw. They are like earth. You look it and they have defaults. They have strange effects. And in fact, the way they do it is because they put it to be cooked in very primitive oven with wood and straws. And so the straws that they wrap around the object, when they burn, they let shine, and maybe the ashes on the oven goes back to the cup or to the ceramic and make effects. So I guess the master of those ceramist master, they are able to control the completely uncontrolled effect of the ashes on the objects. And so they are able to obtain results that every time is a new experience, is a new effect, is a new beauty. And I mean, it's fantastic.
Thank you, Fabio. And Giovanni, the Aira is like a next step, no? It looks really like a more premium car. I mean, in the past you have developed, well, the sets and also the GTR, which is very famous in Japan, that people, I mean, compare it with a Ferrari. And, but this is really a big step in terms of going into premium, no? What is premium for a Japanese brand?
I think it's the attention to the materials and the attention to the composition of that whole space. I mean, speaking of, the simplicity and the minimalism and letting the technology show, instead of ornamentation or adding, it's the elimination of the inessential and focusing on, in the case of Aria, I mean, it is a big milestone as far as electrification and the technology. So, like the interior, we wanted to craft a new experience based on that technology, and having the flat floor and creating a lounge-like experience, and having this almost theater-like, horizontality and landscape in front of you. That it was a new type of premium. It's not the adding chrome and wood and it was the expression of the minimalism that gives it that new freshness. But even the exterior, just this clean one line that goes all the way around the car. It's funny, you're mentioning of Pininfarina, of this elegance, right? Because, some of the Nissans from the 60s and late 50s were done by Pininfarina. And those influenced the company during that mid-century and during the 60s. And it was actually quite a high point for the brand. And then there's always this cycles, I do believe, in design. There's this purity. And then once you've gone all the way pure, you start adding to be new again. And you reach a point where, the technology evolves, I think, and then it's a time to shed all the ornamentation or all the excess and start pure again. I do feel that during the late 80s and early 90s, this was another same period. It was another 30-year cycle from that 60s era. And at that time, it was all about aerodynamics and efficiency and getting the most out of every drop of petrol. And then now you find ourselves 30 years later doing the same thing with electrification, streamlining, shedding, becoming minimal, and letting the technology be showcased. And in our case, is how do we do that and be unique? And in that case, how do we capture the Japanese spirit? And I think through this presentation is, we're trying to describe how to capture that and create a new type of premium. And I think that's what we tried to do with Aria.
And you would call it like quiet innovation? Like, for example, I mean, I don't know if you have seen the exhibition, the audience that is here, but we have the Tama. 70 years ago, Nissan developed the first electric car, no? 70 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that little booth is a little bit of a celebration of past, present, and future. I mean, you can see some of the things that are going to influence our future there as well. But, electrification has been in the company for, 70 years. And obviously, then the Leaf, when the Leaf came out, we were quite a pioneer to bring electrification to the masses. And so we've had 10 years of experience with that. So when we were developing Aria, this car is quite special. I mean, it was not just another electric crossover. I mean, when we were developing that car, there was no electric crossovers yet. I know they're all in the market now, but this was supposed to be a symbol of Nissan's electrification and a symbol of Nissan's DNA for the future. So,
You would like to add something, Fabio? Or?
Well, I can add something. We are talking about premium. Premium is a lot about, as we say, craftsmanship, quality, perfection. And it makes me think, when I think about Japanese and I think about this way of doing perfection, which fits perfectly with what Giovanni has been saying on his design approach so far, and also with the way I interpreted design in my whole experience. It comes in my mind a phrase from Saint-Exupéry, who says that perfection is not when you don't have anything anymore to add to an object, but is when you don't have anything to take away anymore. So when you get to the minimum essence, there is perfection. And this works perfectly for Japanese design. And probably that is the spirit of luxury, of premiumness in Japanese design. So you have exactly what you need at the highest level as possible, but nothing more that spoils it, that disturbs you. So the purity comes from the perfect use of the material, instead of, you choose the material for the effect you want. And it's the combination of different things. We've seen one picture before of the hotel in Tokyo, not the Okura, the Aman Hotel, with this huge box internally completely gold finished. And it's so pure and so simple, but has such a strong impact because they use the material at the maximum of its expression, and they use the proportion at the maximum of its expression, and they perfectly integrated that in the space. So there is a vibrance that comes from the relation between this object and the space around. And this is something, is a concept that we could also try to take on car design, especially in interiors. I've been always trying to think that, again, if I draw a seat, I was trying to draw it like a single piece that was in the middle of a room, and not like something connected and sort of bucket seat for sports car. Of course, if you have to draw a sports car, then it has to be a bucket car, but if you do a premium car, not necessarily. And then also the material themselves, they speak, but they speak also with their imperfections. For example, let me say again one example. I made a project in 2011, a concept car called Cambiano. It was an hybrid electric and with turbine engine. It was a prototype presented in a Geneva Motor Show in 2012. He won various design awards, actually won the design award of innovation in Italy, and he was also honorable mention at the Compasso d'Oro. And in the interior, there was something that was really catching the interest of every people, because there were big surfaces made with recycled wood. And this recycled wood we used was the wood recycled from the briccole di Venezia. Briccole are the poles that you have in the laguna, in the water of Venice. You may imagine if you go to Venice, the water, and then you have all of those poles that actually are signing where the boats should go. And those poles are there in the water for 8-10 years, and when they get completely, ruined by the sea, by the water, by the little animal that bites and eat the wood, they are changed and they are thrown away. So we took some of those woods, those poles, we recycled the wood, we dry it, recycle it, cut it, and reuse it on the interior. Because it was a way to give a third life to the same wood. Before it was an oak tree, actually it's oak, which is and then it was a pole in Venice, and then at the end it was a quality material in a car instead of being thrown away. But the funny thing is that this wood was all beaten by the little animals, so it was full of little holes everywhere. And the first reaction was maybe we fill in the holes and we make it with resin maybe, and we make it pure. And then I said, no, let's leave the holes in the floor, the holes in the doors. And so we have this very pure interior, highly technological, with white or beige, light beige material with medium gray Alcantara. And then you have those big surfaces in wood all completely eaten by these animals in a very totally uncontrolled way. And for me, it was very Japanese as approach, because it's a sort of wabi-sabi. You have the contrast between the new and the old, and the experience of the material that shows what has been experienced in his life, that material. So that is also another way of being premium and luxury for me in Japan.
I think another value also is honesty, and in the fact also that how you use materials. No, they will never put. They will show the raw material by itself.
Exactly.
They will not add something fake on top. No, and this is also part of the Japanese design. No, you wouldn't find. You talk the Amman. I mean, it's an amazing hotel, and maybe the design looks simple, but everything is so well balanced. The craftsmanship is amazing. The use of materials. And it's also like a temporal, you know. This design could last for the next 30, 40, 50 years. You also mentioned the Okura, and we're talking this morning about it, no? I mean, that lobby was amazing, and they didn't touch it. I mean, they kept it as it was for like 60 years, no?
It's still modern.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody from the audience, they would like to have make any questions, so.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this talk. It's so interesting. I have maybe a bit of a banal question, but nevertheless. I've always been interested and fascinated by car design because it seems a little bit a matter of evolution. Like you have a platform that you have been, in general, refining for decades now. And also cars seem to have some facial qualities. They're objects that, suppose because they have two lamps, now they seem to have two eyes that look at you. And I've sort of, whenever I drive and I look at cars, I've sort of grouped them into categories. And I think some cars look like fish, like, for example, the Aston Martins, and other cars look like insects, like maybe a smart or something like that. And you were talking about inspirations. I was wondering whether the animal world has actually ever been an inspiration. Is this just a matter of coincidence, or is it just my subjective perception of things, or is there anything behind this, really?
Can I say something? Well, actually, you are right. I mean, when we talk about car design and when we present our cars, we always say it's the face, but talking about the front of the car. And it's true that there is this sort of impersonification of people by seeing the lamps as the eyes. Actually, now it's becoming more and more difficult because with the new LED lights, they are becoming very simple, and sometimes they're just stripes. There are no more big round things. But, for example, the reference with animal also is very important on cars. Historically, you have plenty of cars which have names of animals, and not by chance, because the animal was the inspiration, you know. And if you think about sports cars, super sports cars, always they tend to be very muscular in their shape. Not just because of showing something, because also the package and the way you cover the wheels and the car has to be as low as possible, so it becomes this very strong and muscular shapes. So I think there is always this relation. I think it's good to go a little bit over that and trying to make it evolve, and I guess especially in the future to come, probably there will be much more evolution. But I tell you a little story that is funny. I remember a friend of mine who took the responsibility in a big car company in China, recent. And Chinese car company, because they are new and fresh, they have sometimes a very ingenuous, or I would say bizarre attitude towards the choices. And also they are very top down, so if the boss decides something, they accept it. And the boss, most of the time, is not necessarily someone who knows about cars, because maybe has been put there by the political influence or whatever. And this friend of mine took the responsibility, and the first few days that they were showing all the project going on, and he looked at the project, this is nice, this, and then he ended up in a room where there was a car that was looking like a fish, but really like a fish. Like, what's the name of the fish from Disney? Nemo.
Nemo.
Nemo, it was really looking like Nemo. And he said, what is this? And the people said, oh, this is the president who really he really loved the movie Nemo, so he asked us to make a car like Nemo. So you're not the only one who see fishes on cars.
I think that a car probably after, and especially when you go premium, is one of the most expensive assets after a house. No? So clearly has a lot of link with emotional values. And each brand tries to capture certain values to identify with certain personalities. No? So as Fabio was saying, I mean, the front end of a car is the face of a person. And it has to have its own character. And sometimes it's not easy to find. I mean, you would take the logo out of many brands, and if you're not an expert, people would say, I don't know which car is this one. No? And this is a challenge for a car designer, no? To create a design language that is so strong that you could take the logo out, and people would say, that's a Nissan, no?
Going back to your question about I do think that the evolution of the car, I mean, it started with the horse. This was our mode of transportation. This was our, and obviously a horse, has a spirit, it has a personality. And, there's still cars today are not, I mean, some cars are products. They're like little cubes of mobility, or there's certain things that are, but the reality is a car it has a personality. It does have eyes and a face and a mouth, and the wheels are its hind legs and front legs, and it's got shoulders and all this. So
yeah, we use those words when we talk about cars. We say the shoulder should be lower, should be fuller. So it's always a reference to the body.
Yeah. So when we were designing cars, we're imbuing that with this kind of spirit, and because it's not a building, it moves, and it has to, relate to its environment. So, I mean, it's still consciously there. It's an animal. It is. But your question about the evolution of the car, that's also interesting. I mean, you have the horse and the carriage, and then the horse became the motor. We still call it horsepower. I don't know, EVs, we probably shouldn't call it horsepower anymore, but so you have the hood where you put the engine, and then you have the compartment, the division of where the horse was and the motor is, and then the cabin, and you got this. And then in the beginning, actually, most cars are just two blocks. It's a carriage with a motor. And then, through the transformation of the compartment and separation of the luggage. But we've gone actually back with SUVs, you've actually gone back to the combination of that storage volume into the main. But I do think in the future you'll see we've done monovolume in the past. But with the necessity for efficiency of aerodynamics, monovolume is probably a shape that will be on the future again. But again, even the width of cars is related to the track of the wagons from the past, so it's still there. And then the whole infrastructure was set up around that, so that's why you still have these certain parameters that have not changed. Not to mention manufacturing. So that's why it's interesting when you have these new car companies that have no history. They have the opportunity to change a lot more versus a company who has 100-year knowledge of building cars. But again, I do think this next generation of electrification will see a bigger leap. But it's also depending on the appetite of the people, right? If you go too far,
They reject.
they reject, or it becomes alien. You know, it loses the approachability, that the familiarity or the spirit of what's been accepted for the last 100 years. So that's why it's such a slow evolution. It's not a product which sits on a table that you can change easily, or
Yeah, there is this fact, because designing a car is a project that takes minimum 3-5 years and big, huge investments. And those huge investments are big risk for the companies, and they are risk for the people who work for the companies. So, you know, a yogurt, if it doesn't work, you take it out of the market and you change it. A car, if you make a wrong car and you have spent few $billion to make, or euros to make the investment, then it's going to have consequences.
Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions from the audience?
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. There is a tendency in the recent car design, there is a tendency just to use screens, not only inside, even I would say that outside as well. For example, if you look at some brands like Audi, now in the new models like e-tron and so on, it seems that they are removing the lights, even the LED lights, and it seems that sometimes they are tending to put like OLED screens in the face. I don't know if this is going to be a tendency in the years to come, just like a feature for design. And the other question is as well inside, because at the end we have seen one of your slides that the other tendency is like to put all the dashboard like a continuous screen. I don't know, maybe you know in the models you are performing now, maybe this is another tendency. And related with that tendency, my question as well would be the integration, because at the end today, design is not only about shape, about purity, it's as well about experience of the software or the integration between the human interface with the, and regarding that, for example, one of the big problems that I still see now in the cars, just thinking in the use, is when you want to use, for example, your navigation system. Today, each car still has a known navigation system, but we know that Google or even Apple has very powerful maps and navigation system that they are working in the integration with the cars. I don't understand as well, a third question, the tendency in this kind of integration between the, let's say, the software that you had in your pocket when you go inside the car, because sometimes it's like a pain in the ass, sorry for the expression, when you have to change from your navigation system to the new. I understand that car manufacturers had to take the advantage in cooperation with these companies just to make that kind of integration. So maybe there are many questions.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can I?
There are at least three different questions, I guess.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. Maybe.
Okay. Well, as Fabio said, to design a car, it takes 3 to 5 years. So that's the first thing. But also a car is supposed to last 10, 20 years. To design a mobile phone, it takes 6 months. So there's a different speed in time, no? So, and also robustness. I mean, when you put electronics in a dashboard, they have to go over 70, 80 degrees on the sun. If you do that with an iPhone, it's going to tell you too hot and it's going to get blocked, no? So technology cannot go at the speed in a car that could go in a consumer electronic product. That's why you start to see these independent screens. So maybe in the future you could make some upgrades, but there's two different markets, no?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, no, I haven't already. No, in fact, it's, of course, the screens are the most useful way to avoid buttons, okay? Of course, when you drive, they have limits. If you go on a driverless car, then you don't need anymore to drive, and then you can do whatever you want with the screen. So that's why a lot of those new electric EV or even already mostly autonomous car, they have already full, huge screen where you can do everything else rather than driving. So it's a trend that is going on, and when there is a new technology that is pushing, always the tendency is to use and maybe even abuse of that technology for a while, and then maybe it goes back. But what Jaime was saying is that the car industry cannot keep up the pace of technological innovation in product consumer, in electronic consumer products, because the time of development of a car is too long, and the time of life, the lifetime of a car is too long, and you cannot. So that's the way to have maybe an agreement or a collaboration with a service company or IT company to use their technology, and so to have a neutral technology inside the car that allows to accept and evolve. At the same time, you cannot say, okay, we take away everything and we just use the phone. Because if you drive in a car, or if you're still in a car that has to be driven, you need to go through many different requirements of security and safety. And I mean, car companies are responsible of the safety of their products, so they want to make sure that whatever you have there that can disturb you during the driving, it's all under control, and the functionality are perfectly, are not just confused and done for other services. So there is an integration that is necessary. And now, if this thing will go by making screen bigger and bigger and bigger, or maybe by disappearing and having just vocal effect, or maybe just augmented reality on the windshield, that probably another story. Maybe Giovanni cannot tell us what he's doing now, but probably he can give us a vision.
Well, I think what's going to happen in that real estate, that territory, is the next frontier for car design, especially for the next generation, the generation that doesn't like cars. You know, the generation that doesn't like cars, they like this. Like my son, they like this. But the car, this is going to be a platform for connectivity and for different uses, I think, especially at the advent of autonomous mobility. But it's true, what Fabio was saying, so many hurdles of safety right now that preventing us, when you are driving, the distraction or so. But anyway, this is to look for that space. This is going to be a big level of change, I think, happening there. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Giovanni and Fabio. I think we're coming to the end. And I would like to thank, this exhibition would have not been possible without the support of Nissan. And really, it was a sponsor from the beginning, but also the Ayuntamiento de Madrid, the Council of Madrid, the Community of Madrid, and a few other sponsors. Thank you very much, Nissan, for your support, because we went through a process to bring this here, and you were always supporting from the first day. Thank you.
Thank you.